Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another book rant. Today I'm going to be covering this book, The Blacktongue Thief. I really enjoyed the book, but before I get into the content, I'm going to discuss the cover and some of the things on it. And also how I found this book, which is a good place to start. I saw this advertised on social media. I forget if it was on Reddit or on Twitter, but it was being advertised by the author themselves. It showed up on my timeline, on my feed, and I thought, that looks interesting. Sure, I'll check it out. Now, this is copyright 2021. It's a Tor book. This is the first paperback edition, 2022. I'm looking for the cover design. Let's see. Cover art by Marie Bergeron. It shows a tower in the distance with vines all over it, two figures headed towards it, and then some swords that are set in rocks, set in a horse's skeleton, set in a person's skeleton. And there's a small little blurb, a little tagline on it that says, "Your smallest mistake could become your biggest adventure." And I really liked the blurb I saw of it advertising it, so I thought I might as well buy it new. It also has praise from Glenn Cook on the back. Glenn Cook, his book right over my left shoulder, The Chronicles of the Black Company, right up on that bookshelf. Fast, fun, and filled with crazy magic. A comment from Brent Weeks, who is also right over my left shoulder. I've got the Night Angel trilogy. I still haven't gotten around to reading it. It's in my queue. A delight from start to finish from Anthony Ryan. I don't know who that is, but, the other people that have commented on it are people I've heard good things about or have read and thought were good writers, so The blurb on the cover says your smallest mistake could become your biggest adventure, but I think that's kind of not a great tagline because the way the back cover matter discusses it, what leads into the big adventure is the biggest mistake that the main perspective character made. So Kinch Nashanik is a thief, a member of the Takers Guild, and as it turns out, to become a licensed thief, you kind of need to spend a lot of money, and it's a predatory system so that you're basically always in debt to this guild. Kinch is trying to work off that debt. He's attacking anyone he sees on a certain highway, and his latest job as a highwayman, his latest hit, turns out to hit back pretty friggin' hard. What's notable in his narration is that they have warbirds, which are these giant people-sized crows that are outlawed. And so this person has these giant warbirds. They disappear shortly after the fight, and it's a lone woman, a knight effectively, someone in a knight's armor, a lone woman traveling through the area on foot. She survives, and then Kinch is tasked with accompanying her on this mission and has to kind of find a flimsy excuse for her putting up with his company. But the knight, whose name is Galva, is searching for her lost queen, a witch queen, and one who is kind of notorious for inviting ruin upon her kingdom by expelling the Takers Guild from that kingdom. What I especially love about this map is that it really is a continent. A lot of times you'll see this, and I kind of didn't like it about Orconomics and a couple other books I've read, is that the map is very zoomed in, but then when you look at it, it's not really zoomed in, it's just a large continent with very few nations. Whereas in this setting, there's a lot of nations that you can see in a quasi European peninsular kind of continent, one with dozens of nations and city states and the like. What the Takers Guild did is weasel its way into having an iron grip on basically every single nation. And when one of those nations says, no, I don't want you here at all, they take that as an affront to their power. If one kingdom can expel the Takers Guild, then every kingdom could possibly do that. And so they retaliate, and Galva is looking for her queen, and Kinch is basically looking for that queen as well to finally assassinate her and to hinder any attempt to get followers to that queen. So there's that side plot. There's a somewhat of a romance where Kinch is falling for this young witch, and this witch is the apprentice of a very Baba Yaga-esque kind of witch. The senior witch is unable to use her legs and uses various necromancied pawns to move her about, and the younger apprentice is accompanying the two other characters, Galva and Kinch, and Kinch is kind of falling for her while also kind of removing himself from the guild as best he can. The more he sees of the guild's bullshit, the more he sees of the guild's shenanigans and evil, the more he is inclined to get out of it. That's a fun romp. The story is really engaging, and the setting is really interesting too. And that's the part I haven't talked about yet, except for my love of that map. And that's that the many nations formed a coalition to fight these goblins. These goblins are about waist high. They consume basically everything they can, and they're the source of they're the enemies for the last two great wars. The first war was an invasion by the goblins into the continent, and it took a coalition of many nations to put an end to that invasion. And during that first invasion, two main things happened. Firstly, about 1 in 3 men across every one of those nations that was in the coalition, 1 in 3 men are injured or killed. They lose an entire generation of men, an even greater ratio of casualties, injured and killed in combat than France had in World War One. And so this is an apocalyptic war. And in the first war, one of the nations on the eastern side of the continent, its name is Ispanthia. It's a nation of horsemen, cavaliers, and their cavalry is what breaks the goblins in that first war. Then, about 10 years later, the second war rolls around, and now every able-bodied man that survived is sent to the war. The coalition comes back together because they need to defend themselves. The goblins introduce a virus. Their magic hooks up a virus that kills every horse. Basically, the only horses that survive are mares, and all male horses are dead. And so there's no more, after this war, all the older ones are getting older and dying out, and this is believed to be the last generation of horses in the world. The goblins create this virus specifically to counter the cavalry that did them in the first war. And after the virus, Ispanthia basically says, "We're out, we're not dealing with this." And so every other coalition nation brings in every man they can, but then they also bring in a lot of women. And so the second war is even more apocalyptic because now they're losing not just a generation of young men and older men, but also a significant portion of their working women as well. The women after the first war had to pick up the slack and do a lot of the things the men would do around society. Now, those women are fighting the wars as well, and the goblins are barely beaten back, and there are a couple uneasy truces. So some port cities have like a goblin quarter, and we actually see that in one of the chapters where there's a like no man's land between the goblin quarters where they are allowed to do some trade, and the humans quarters where there are for the most part the bulk of the city's population. And after a certain hour of the day, humans don't cross into the goblins' territory. But goblins will egg on a human to try and kill one of theirs, thus allowing them to retaliate. And we see that where basically a human is egged on, is insulted enough that he breaks and attacks one of the goblins, and when he does so, the goblin bites down on him, and then other goblins reach across and start pulling that goblin in, and other humans start coming in and pulling the human back to their side. And if the human tug of war side succeeds, then any goblins that are stuck in the human side are free to be killed. But if the goblin side of that tug of war wins, then the human is eaten and killed, and for the most part eaten in front of a lot of those humans, the ones that just lost that tug of war. And if anyone else gets pulled in with it, those additional victims also get eaten and killed. So there's this bizarre truce where some of the goblins are allowed to do trade with humans, but also they're still at war enough that they're preying upon humans to the best of their ability. And the humans put up with it because there's this trade opportunity, because they're basically impossible to kill at this point. And the goblins are a nightmarish creature, a nightmarish force in this setting. So the setting really sets it as an apocalyptic era. All the horses have been wiped out. So many men and women have been wiped out. The fact that this main character, Kinch, is not a soldier is actually impressive because he's of the age where he should have been fighting in the Second War. And so all of this really combines to pretty serious effect where the quest is hindered by all these different forces, the Witch Queen's forces, the Ispanthian forces, the goblins, the humans from various nations, the Takers Guild. All of these forces are pushing and pulling in different directions the main cast, and I really liked it. At every point in the book, I wanted to know what was going to happen next. And from the look of it, there's going to be a sequel, and there probably is already a sequel. But from what I understand, the second book in this isn't going to be a sequel, but a prequel called The Daughters' War. And that's going to be, I think, basically about the second war that happens. But Book 2 is going to come. It's going to be a prequel, and then eventually there's going to be a book 3 that is a sequel to the Blacktongue Thief. It's a really fun, it's a really amazing story. I loved it, and I think it was worth the price I paid for it. So I actually bought this book used. So this, according to Amazon, I bought it for $9.14. It's an unread publisher overstock copy. So yeah, I got it for cheaper than I remember getting it, and it was pretty good. Now that I'm looking at the inside cover, I'm seeing praise from Jonathan French, author of The Grey Bastards, which I did not like at all. So maybe that could have colored my opinion more if I had seen that praise in this before I bought the book. But there's also, you know, Robin Hobb has some praise for it. Glenn Cook, who I hadn't read at the time that I bought this book, but the Chronicles of the Black Company are a really good trilogy. I really loved it when I read it last month, and I'm thinking, if I read this praise now, there's a lot of good and bad that I'm seeing from, I don't like the Grey Bastards, so that would be a detractor, but I like Glenn Cook, and that would be a plus for me. So there's a lot of authors' praise here. I really like what I read, and I think if you read this, you're going to get a fun experience. I paid $10 for this, and I got $10 worth and more out of this. So I strongly encourage you to check this one out. The Blacktongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman. A very, very fun book. Anyway, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant.